Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Been meaning to do this interview for a while now. It's with Edgar of Theoretica Applied Physics, the Bacch-SP. As you know, if you've been following along, I became a customer after hearing it at Capital Audio Fest. And then I loved it so much, I got to know Edgar better, and we just started talking, and he thought I'd make a great home dealer. And that's worked out amazingly. I can't believe how many I've sold in just the first 3-4 months that I've been doing this. And you've seen the testimonials. I've put videos up of the testimonials, people coming into my room, hearing it firsthand. And so I've put a lot of content out, but by the time you watch this, there's another big event that has just occurred that I can now release to the public. He has won a golden ear by Absolute Sound. So yet another piece of validation for those that can't go to the shows and hear it for yourself. And there is a 14-day trial, so there is no risk. But wanted to give you guys comfort from the validation standpoint. The awards now are coming in. And now also this Zoom will give you a chance to hear straight from Edgar some of the in-the-weed stuff. My subscriber base is basically audiophiles that like to get into the weeds. It's a small niche, but you like to understand how things work. This is going to get into those weeds. 45 minutes long, so you may not be able to watch it all at one time. But I wanted to give it to you raw, give it to you as much as possible without heavily editing it or anything. So hopefully you'll enjoy that aspect. And I put chapters so you can jump ahead. But I did want to deviate 1 second to say one thing about Instagram. And it ties into what I do with this channel and what happened with Edgar, is that I do this channel not for the money YouTube pays me. I mean, I'm in the top 2% in the world in YouTube because I'm over 10,000 subscribers. You're already in the top 2%, but you still make no money. I'll put up how much I made. I just took a screenshot the other day. It's pennies. And then it turns people into desperate beggars, like at a stoplight, trying to get likes, subscribes, just to get a few pennies more from YouTube. That's not why you should have that goal. Some people can reach it, but it's a small percentage. To me, the value is not that money. The value is the relationships I've been able to forge, the connections I've been able to make to you guys, other manufacturers, all these things that I've always done in the past anyway, being a part of the hobby, but now sharing it and interacting with you guys has been the payoff. And so to that extent, Instagram, I found, is now a very conducive social media tool for me to, again, get that value of forging relationships with you guys, because I can follow you back. Like, and it's not a one-way street. I can message back and forth. I can tag manufacturers that are on Instagram. It's just a much more conducive social media site for certain types of my content. And again, you know, my content is more of the weeds-based or fun-based. It's not based on all eye candy and, you know, stereotypical review site that is for SEO purposes and Google purposes that do somewhat well. Mine is a little bit different as a hodgepodge, so I'm going to use both sites as kind of a hodgepodge. So if you're not following me on Instagram and you like that kind of content and interactions more, I just wanted to give you that quick shout out. But without further ado, let's get started with this great interview with Edgar. I'm glad so many of you could attend on such short notice, because I've been meaning to do this for a long time, have Edgar on, but as many of you know, being in the WhatsApp group, and Edgar as well knows, we've been very busy fulfilling a lot of your orders and, you know, doing shows and also reviews, and some news on that front with reviews coming up. But basically, for those people, Edgar, who has, for those that don't know Edgar, he's got you want to wave, Edgar, so people know who you are on the screen. He's also got 4 buddies in the background to help him answer questions. But basically, for those that have never heard of Theoretica Applied Physics, the Bacch-SP, it'd be hard to imagine you haven't watched my channel and heard about it. But just in case you haven't, wanted to introduce you to Edgar today, get a chance to have some customer testimonials that are here today, as well as question and answering and some updates on what's coming up new. So, Edgar, can you give a little quick rundown on yourself and the 20-second to 1-minute version of your Bacch-SP?
Well, first, my name is Edgar Choueiri. I am, like you, I'm an audiophile. I love sound. I love music, but I also love sound, and I admit it. I'm really a sound-loving person since I was a kid. my professional track took me in a different direction. I was trained as a physicist. I've been doing research for more than 3 decades on space propulsion. I have a laboratory right next door to where I'm standing here that does what I do, work on this plasma rockets for space propulsion. But my passion has been always also music, and I'm not a good musician. So I've been recording musicians since I was a kid as a way to get close to the act of music making. And mostly orchestras. I started with small groups, then I started recording orchestras, mostly my school orchestras and university orchestras and so on, as an amateur recording engineer. And I was always frustrated by the lack of spatial realism. So when I record something, I play it back, it sounds great from a tonal point of view. Microphones have been perfected from the 1950s. Even tape recorders were very good. Digital recording became excellent. But spatial realism, the idea that instruments appearing in space, was always off. So I got to work on that, initially as purely as a hobby at home. And then I got lucky with a couple of breakthroughs here and there, mathematical solutions. And then somebody was crazy enough to give me funding to start a lab at the university. Now the lab is sustained by research funding from various well-known companies. But my hobby being an audiophile and my work having to do with audio, I decided to take some of the main discoveries that my group does and other groups around the country, but mostly my group does in spatial audio, and take them to the realm of high-end audio, because there people would appreciate them. I know how to make high-end equipment because you don't need to cut corners. You just do the best you can without thinking about the price, and then you figure out the price afterwards that's fair based on what you end up spending in hardware and software. So I know how to do that. I don't know how to design industrial equipment. So I decided to form a company to take some of the findings we have that my wonderful research group, mostly wonderful graduate students who surround me and postdocs and so on, and take them, the ones that I think are relevant, bring them to the realm of audio. The first one was my work on Bach, which I will describe later on as a way to do crosstalk cancellation, which is the key to a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about. And I don't want to give a long lecture right now. I'll come back to it, but it's a way to get the cues, the spatial cues in actual recording, especially acoustic recordings. Transmit it to your ear and brain system in such a way that your brain will hear the spatial image correctly. And when I mean correctly, I really mean as accurately as possible, and not some kind of surround sound where you are surrounded by speakers to give you some kind of envelopment. That's not accurate. That can be wonderful for movies and explosions and Hollywood helicopters going around you, but not for accuracy. I mean, the surround systems cannot give you, for example, proximity. You cannot get someone to whisper in your ear. I was after the truly accurate three-dimensional reproduction. It turns out that stereo as a medium can carry and quite often has all the cues. And it turns out that the hurdle to get to the cues to you is called crosstalk. And that's been known since the year around the time I was born among acousticians and some people in audio, but mostly it's a known fact. It's called crosstalk. I'll come back to it later, but crosstalk cancellation is a way to fix that problem, fix the major flaw in stereo, and then that allows you to naturally hear the spatial cues in most stereo recordings. And we'll come back to that. A lot of people are hung up on the fact that some stereo recordings do not they should only work on binaural recordings. I'd like someone to remind me later on to explain why this actually, as all of you who have Bach and have used it, know it works beautifully on non-binaural recordings. Binaural recordings are like 0.1% of, if not less, of the music out there. Nobody would be buying Bach and using it if it's only binaural recordings. So I've been having a lot of fun. Was great meeting Jason. I spent most of my time in the lab, so having someone who's connected to the world of audiophiles, it has really picked up. The past year has been wonderful. We've been around since 2016, and it's been word of mouth. And people love it, and there've been more and more reviews. The past year had been great. It's one award after the other. Jason and his community had been wonderful. I'm really so pleased to be here talking to you guys. I recognize almost every face here. I've been spent at least 2 hours with each of you and some more. And it really makes it fun. I'm really enjoying this. It's just great. Anyway, this is in terms of an overall kind of introduction. I'll shut up.
Well, I just wanted to share
that part as well. But in terms of me meeting you, I actually went into your room. I don't think you were in the room at the time for Expona last year. But what was interesting, and it's a common occurrence, that's why I want to share this, is I didn't even realize what the Bach was last year at Expona because I did sit in the sweet spot. I was there on the side. I think David Jansen was running your room at the time. And I left totally unaware of what a revolutionary product it was. It wasn't until Pete the Greek, who's on the call today, came in and told me at Capital Audio Fest to come in and get that center seat, requested a few songs. And that's when I realized, hey, this is something totally different. But I want to share with people, I don't know if I have shared this on the channel, what really, you allowed me to pick a song. Now we did the flies buzzing in my ear, the three-dimensional proximity effect was amazing. But what I was able to do was choose a song that I knew the recording visually because I have the DVD, the Eagles, Hell Freezes Over, the live concert DVD. And we played that streaming version. And when we did the A-B of the Bach in and out, I was so used to it being heavily dense, condensed in between the speakers that I've heard that song thousands of times that at first I was like, that doesn't sound like it sounds at my house. But then I realized after, oh, I got my dogs going crazy here. But after we turned on the Bach, it was when I really realized this is actually more accurate because I had seen the DVD and I knew how spaced out the artists were. And there wasn't that confined presentation that I was so used to between the speakers. And that was the point at which I immediately, if you watch my videos from first meeting you, I was immediately calculating, how can I buy this? And then I reached out to you and the rest is kind of history from there. So a lot of people have similar stories to that in terms of not knowing until they get in that sweet spot. And a lot of people that are on the call today have been in the sweet spot at my house and had a chance to listen or at your demos. But how could you explain this to somebody? I know crosstalk is what your right ear hears of the left speaker and vice versa, and that kind of corrupts the imaging and collapses it. But can you give a layperson's example of what they can expect without doing this demo?
Sure. Well, first, to explain why crosstalk cancellation is needed or what it is, it's important to understand how humans locate sound. Not only humans, a lot of mammals do the same thing. Some mammals are far better at it than we are, but mammals, humans with or mammals with two ears do it the following way. So if someone make a click right here on the right side, let's say, if you close your eyes, you can tell it's coming from there, from the right and left. Of course, that's essential for our survival. When the bear is coming from the right, you better know it's coming from here, especially if you cannot see it. But the reason why your brain can tell a sound is coming from there is because of three types of cues that your brain is getting. The first one, it takes a little bit longer for that sound to get to the left ear than the right ear. That's time difference between the left and right ear, which is called interaural time difference, is sensed by the brain-ear system, down to about 10 microseconds. So even 10 microsecond difference, the brain can tell these differences. And if it is delayed with respect, if the left ear is delayed with respect to the right ear, it knows, your brain knows the sound must be coming from the right. We evolved that way, we perfected that to survive and we use it all the time. Even if you have hearing impairment, you can still do that to a large extent, believe it or not. Also, the loudness, if you make a click like this, and it's a little bit louder on the right ear, especially if it's closer to your head than the left ear. And that difference in level is called interaural level difference, ILD. And the first one is called ITD, this is called ILD, and interaural time difference, interaural level difference, is how humans use that. And typically at high frequencies, it's very effective because the wavelengths are large enough, they're attenuated, they're not wrapping around your head. The wavelengths are small enough, they're attenuated by your head, they're wrapping around, your brain can use the high frequency component ILD. But the bottom line is we use these cues. We also use another cue, which is very important, because if somebody standing right in front of you makes a click, it arrives at the right and left ear at the same time. And your brain knows that still it's coming from in front of you or high or low. How does it do that? Even though the ILD and ITD are zero, because the level is the same on left, right ear, the time is the same. Your brain knows that because the sound gets colored by the outer ear. As it enters it does something called refraction. I'm sorry, there's something called diffraction. Diffraction when sound waves go around objects, and it diffracts around your ear, enters, and as it diffracts and enters, it mixes and acquires a certain tonal content, and your brain interprets that tonality, which is different for every human. But your brain is used to it in such a way that if it hears it with a certain content, it knows it's coming from up here. And the combination of this called spectral cues with the ILD cues, ITD cues is how the brain hears. Okay, this is how we hear. If you understand that, then you can easily understand how stereo works and why it's flawed, and how crosstalk cancellation can fix it. So if you make a recording with 2 microphones, and somebody walks around stage and sings, you're capturing, depending on the microphone types, but you're capturing at least some of these cues. For example, if you're using omni microphones, which are quite standard in recording classical music and jazz, you capture the interaural time difference because they're omni. They're not sensitive to the direction. The amplitude is the same. But if you separate them, it's called spaced omni. You capture this interaural time difference, and your brain can use that to construct a stereo image. The advantage of these microphones are they also capture the whole ambiance, so they're very useful for recording classical music and acoustic music. If you use different kind of techniques called ORTF, or the techniques that are coincident, these are all techniques that rely on microphones having cardioid shape pattern of radiation, which allows them to hear different level of different amplitude depending on the distance. And by tilting the microphones in such a way, you can capture the ILD I mentioned earlier, the interaural level difference. So any techniques, any stereo microphone techniques capture one of these cues I mentioned earlier. The binaural technique happens to capture all of them. You put binaural technique, you take a dummy head like this guy here, and you put microphones in the ear, right ear and left ear right here. And then you record, and that has a realistic ears right here. You see them, this pinna. And so they simulate pretty much all the cues. That's the most accurate way to record stereo. And David Choueiri has recorded 41 albums, and actually, he's the one who brought me into high-end audio. He took me to my first Munich show when we unveiled this. First at CES, he brought me there the first time. And then he took me to every Munich show. It's to him that I owe being in this field. So Choueiri has been recording. I recorded more than 41 albums with this technique. It's the purest technique. It captures all 3. But you don't have to capture all 3. As long as you capture one of them is enough. However, the problem is that when you deliver that through speakers, something bad happens. It corrupts the difference. For example, if somebody is walking on stage and comes and whispers in your ear, if you measure the sound pressure, it's about, when he gets close to your ear, it's about 15 decibel louder than here. Okay, and when he goes back further, it drops to 10 dB. When it goes in the center, is 0. So that level difference, it has to be simulated correctly. With speakers, if the speaker is a plus or minus 30 degrees, if it makes a certain sound, this right speaker, it only builds up about 3 dB, 3 or 4 decibel, meaning that with regular stereo, you cannot deliver more than 3 decibel or 4 decibel interaural level difference. So the image is completely stuck between the speakers. It's called a phantom image. You can only move it by doing level panning. And we get used to that. As a matter of fact, I know some audiophiles who, including myself initially, we're more used to that than real live sound because we spend more time listening to our stereo than going to concerts. So, however, that's not how we hear. In order to allow the two-speaker system to deliver more higher pressure on the left and right ear, you need to make sure that what's on the right channel arrives at the right ear without being heard by the left ear. If not, it will mess up that difference I mentioned, the level difference. So to stop that, you need to stop it's called the crosstalk. In other words, you want to make sure that the left ear does not hear the right ear. This has been known since 1964. And some ingenious people back then worked on finding a solution. Back then, it was all tubes and circuits and analog. And they did some crosstalk cancellation to demonstrate this. But it had a number of flaws, a number of problems that only were solved in the past, decade or so. The bottom line is you need to do crosstalk cancellation to be able to deliver to your brain-ear system this interaural level difference correctly. If not, you're going to hear the speakers, and you're going to be limited to where the speakers are. And to demonstrate how flawed stereo is, play anything and take the speakers and get them as close to 12 o'clock as possible. And eventually the entire stereo image will collapse. This is because you're listening to the speakers. You're not listening to this sound image, the stereo sound image recorded. The cue is there. With Bach, those of you who have Bach can do that experiment, can take the speakers and put them at 12 o'clock and make a filter. The image will remain 3D because you're not listening to the speakers anymore. You're listening to the cues in the recording. These cues, what we call the binaural cues that I mentioned, which don't have to be recorded binaurally. The interaural level difference, interaural time difference, and the spectral cues if they exist. So crosstalk cancellation is a way to achieve that. To finish this whole story, even though it was invented in 1964, it was not practical. It requires very complex equipment. And it also is very hard to optimize in the analog domain. With the advent of computers, people worked on it again, and they were developed digital filters, but they still had the major problem. Those filters caused a lot of coloration to the sound. So probably the most important contribution that I made was to find a way to do that without coloration. And my university realized it's important enough to patent it. The university seldom patents something unless they know it's going to make money, it's important. So, and they did a good thing because it really paid off. It turned out to be very desirable for many things, especially audiophiles who would love to hear a 3D image without paying a price on coloration. Finally, I'm going to say, just to demonstrate yourself, that Bach does not color the image. You can always bypass Bach. And those of you who have Bacch-SP, I'll give a demo later on. But you can click on bypass, and you'll hear that the sound does not change at all. As a matter of fact, if you're outside the sweet spot, you cannot even tell when you toggle between Bach and bypass. And that's really the first patent. If I share the screen right here, maybe some of you, I show you something that one of you have not seen before. There's a button right here called credits. If you click on it to see some of the patents that we filed that we granted. The first one, which is now granted all around the world, is called spectrally uncolored optimal crosstalk cancellation for audio through loudspeakers. It's been licensed to Theoretica by my university, even though I'm the inventor, it belongs to my university. And there are a bunch of other patents here. So that patent is about doing crosstalk cancellation for the first time without affecting the tonal quality. And that made it, for the first time, something worthy of the high-end audio, the audiophile world, where people would not want to pay a price to hear 3D by making piano sound like a xylophone, which is how it was practically before. Okay, long-winded explanation. I'll stop right here. I'll ask if there are any questions on what I said so far.